Okay, so if you clicked on this video, I assume you were at least somewhat familiar with what a weeaboo is, but for those of you who are not, weeaboos are basically just people, Western people, who are way too obsessed with Japan and see it as this bastion of civilization, you know? Usually, weeaboos are people who just got way too into anime, and then somehow they just got it in their heads that Japan is this perfect place with no problems, and they see its culture as being superior to their own home culture, and just things like that, you know? For the most part, they're just kind of annoying. You know, like, a lot of the time people who become weeaboos, like I said, they become that because they're just way too into anime, but sometimes it's also because they're just way too into, like, Japanese video games or something. But the point is, usually they get into it, and then they're a weeaboo for a little while, and then they grow up and realize, oh, okay, yeah, that's pretty stupid. Japan is just a country like any other, you know? It has flaws and everything, but it's a lovely place from what I've heard, but, you know, it is just a country at the end of the day. It's not this perfect beacon of civilization, you know? The samurai were not the ultimate warriors. Katanas were not, like, far superior to Western blades or anything like that. Like, it's an interesting phenomenon, really. Now, the thing that really caused this explosion in weeaboos is because over the past, like, 25 to 30 years, the West has just been flooded with a bunch of Japanese media. You know, anime, video games, Japanese movies have not only been brought over here, but remade into things like The Ring. J-dramas are fairly big. I kind of hate that I have to bring this up, but obviously hentai and JAV is a pretty big thing here, too. Like, just when you flood the market with this almost idealized vision of Japan, which that's what media often is, it's like an idealized vision of the place where it takes place. You know, like, it could be an idealized version of, like, small-town living, or an idealized version of New York City, or an idealized version of France, or, you know, just basically anywhere. And that's what a lot of this is. It's an idealized version of Japan. And because they were exposed to all that, that's what created weeaboos. That's why they became this way. And that brings me to my next point, which is a lot of Korean media has been coming into the West lately. Like, things like Parasite and Squid Games and Train to Busan are all, you know, movies and TV shows that were made in South Korea, which are becoming popular in the West, which is overall a good thing. I think South Korean cinema has been neglected by people in the US for a very long time, and possibly people in other places too, but I'm less familiar with them. And hey, a lot of these movies are good. And, you know, there have also been a couple of video games as well, like StarCraft and stuff. And of course, who can forget K-pop? You know, I'm not super familiar with it myself, but I'm aware that groups like BTS and Blackpink are pretty big, both in Korea and over here, and they're obviously basically slaves to their record label, but that's a separate discussion. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is that when you flood all this in here, it has created a small but growing number of Koreaboos. And Koreaboos are basically the same thing as weeaboos, only with Korea. You know, they are just way too into the history and culture, and a bunch of them keep saying, like, oh, I want to move there and be an English teacher. It's always English teacher for some reason. Like, they always want to move there because they just think it's that easy, and they always think that they'll just be able to get a job specifically as an English teacher. I guess because that's the only real skill a lot of them have, is being able to speak English. And as the number of Koreaboos grows and grows and grows more, eventually there's going to be enough of them to really challenge the weeaboos. Which brings me to my final point, which is that there are a small minority of weeaboos who are basically Japanese nationalists. The thing is, weeaboos are by definition not Japanese, and well, like I said, they hold it up as like this pinnacle of civilization, so you can see how that would tie into some weird nationalist sentiments. But let me tell you, you have not lived until you've seen a white American teenager wearing a Pokemon shirt deny the rape of Nanking. Yes, this is a real thing that I have seen in real life. It is, it is very strange. And you don't have to be an expert in history or in Japanese or Korean culture to know that those are two groups of people who don't always like each other very much, and, well, when you look at the history, you can kind of see why, and I feel weird saying that, because whenever I do mention why so many Koreans dislike Japan, and I mention like the colonization and occupation and various massacres and war crimes that went down there, whenever I bring that up, it almost feels like I'm trying to justify racism against Japanese people, and I'm very much not. It's still a bad thing. I'm just explaining that's why it exists. But yes, Koreans and Japanese people don't always get along, and so when that group of Koreaboos gets large enough that we start seeing Korean nationalists emerge, they're eventually going to start butting heads with the Weeaboo nationalists, and well, that's going to be funny. They're going to start arguing over the veracity of IJA war crimes and IJN war crimes, and they're going to start talking about whether or not the colonization actually helped Korea, and just, oh my god, it's going to be beautiful. And I know there's a lot of tensions in that part of the world between Taiwan and, between them and Taiwan and China and North Korea, and if that ever, like, gets worse at the same time that the Koreaboo faction gets large enough to challenge the Weeaboo faction, life is going to get really stupid really quick.